Ivan the Terrible, the Tsar who killed his own son. In November of 1581, inside a royal residence outside Moscow, Ivan IV, the ruler history remembers as Ivan the Terrible, struck his eldest son and heir with a pointed staff during a fit of rage, delivering a blow to the head that would prove fatal days later. The heir to Russia's throne died at his father's hands, an act that would permanently alter the succession of the Russian state and stands as one of the most infamous moments in a reign already defined by extraordinary violence, paranoia, and brutality that reshaped Russia forever. Ivan became Grand Prince of Moscow at just 3 years old, following his father's death, inheriting a throne he was far too young to actually rule, leaving Russia governed by a series of competing noble factions who spent the following years locked in vicious power struggles among themselves, frequently in front of the young prince, exposing him from an early age to a court environment defined by betrayal, violence, and constant political manipulation. Historical accounts suggest Ivan's childhood was marked by neglect and periodic cruelty from the very nobles nominally responsible for his upbringing. Experiences some historians argue profoundly shaped the psychological patterns of suspicion and brutality that would come to define his adult rule. In 1547, at 16 years old, Ivan formally took direct control of Russia and was crowned not simply as Grand Prince, the traditional title of Moscow's rulers, but as Tsar, a title derived from the Roman word Caesar, deliberately positioning himself as the legitimate successor to the authority of the fallen Roman and Byzantine empires, and establishing a new, more absolute conception of Russian royal authority that would persist for centuries afterward. His early reign showed genuine promise, implementing significant legal, administrative, and military reforms, expanding Russian territory substantially through successful military campaigns, and initially ruling in close cooperation with a group of trusted advisors who helped moderate his more impulsive tendencies. This early period of relatively stable, effective governance ended dramatically following the death of Ivan's first wife Anastasia in 1560, an event that appears to have triggered a profound psychological shift in the Tsar, who became convinced, without ever producing definitive proof, that Anastasia had been deliberately poisoned by conspiring nobles seeking to undermine his authority. Whether or not this suspicion held any factual basis, historians largely agree it marked the beginning of an escalating pattern of paranoia that would come to define the remainder of Ivan's reign, as he grew increasingly convinced that the Russian nobility, known as the boyars, were engaged in constant conspiracy against him. In 1565, Ivan implemented what remains one of the most extraordinary and terrifying periods of state-sanctioned violence in Russian history, establishing a private, personal police and military force known as the Oprichnina, which operated entirely outside traditional legal and administrative structures, answering directly and exclusively to Ivan himself, and dressed distinctively in black robes, riding black horses, with dogs' heads and brooms attached to their saddles, symbolizing their self-proclaimed mission to sniff out treason and sweep it from Russia entirely. This organization was granted essentially unlimited authority to arrest, torture, execute, and confiscate the property of anyone Ivan personally suspected of disloyalty without meaningful legal process or oversight, and was used extensively to systematically terrorize, imprison, and execute members of the Russian nobility Ivan increasingly viewed as existential threats to his rule. The most devastating single episode of this period occurred in 1570, when Ivan, having received reports, likely exaggerated or entirely fabricated, suggesting the city of Novgorod was planning to defect to Poland-Lithuania, personally led his Oprichnina forces in a brutal military campaign against his own Russian city, resulting in what historians estimate as the deaths of tens of thousands of Novgorod's own civilian population, through mass executions, torture, and the deliberate destruction of the city's economic infrastructure, a devastating act of violence directed not against a foreign enemy, but against Ivan's own subjects based on suspicions that were never actually substantiated with credible evidence. Ivan's personal life proved similarly marked by violence and instability. He married a total of 7 times throughout his life, an extraordinary number for the era. With several of his wives dying under circumstances historians continue to debate, including suspected poisoning and others being forcibly sent to convents when Ivan grew dissatisfied with them, actions that stood in direct tension with the religious and social norms of the Russian Orthodox Church, which Ivan navigated through his substantial personal authority over religious institutions. The most personally devastating incident of Ivan's reign occurred in November of 1581, when Ivan, in a fit of rage reportedly triggered by a dispute over his son's pregnant wife, whom Ivan felt was dressed inappropriately, struck his eldest son and designated heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with his pointed staff, delivering a blow to the head. Historical accounts suggest Ivan was immediately overcome with grief and remorse once he realized the severity of the injury, personally attempting to save his son's life in the following days. But the young heir died of his injuries within several days, leaving Ivan without his intended successor, and Russia's succession dangerously unclear, since Ivan's only surviving son, Fyodor, was widely regarded by contemporaries as intellectually limited and poorly suited to effectively rule the vast, complicated Russian state Ivan had built. This single act of violence against his own son carried consequences extending far beyond Ivan's personal grief, since Fyodor's eventual, largely ineffective reign following Ivan's death in 1584 left Russia's succession increasingly unstable, contributing directly to a subsequent period of Russian history known as the Time of Troubles, a prolonged era of political chaos, foreign invasion, and civil conflict that nearly resulted in the complete collapse of the Russian state itself, before stability was eventually restored through the establishment of a new ruling dynasty decades later. Modern historians studying Ivan's reign continue to debate the underlying causes of his escalating paranoia and violence, with some pointing to potential physical ailments, including analysis of his remains suggesting possible mercury poisoning from medical treatments common during the era, which some researchers argue could have contributed to genuine psychological instability, while others emphasize the profound impact of his traumatic childhood experiences, combined with the genuine ongoing political instability and periodic conspiracies that did exist within the Russian nobility throughout his reign. Even if Ivan's response to these threats, real and perceived alike, proved wildly disproportionate to any actual danger he faced. What makes Ivan's reign endure as one of history's most studied examples of a ruler's psychological deterioration directly shaping the fate of an entire nation is the sheer scale of the consequences that followed from what began as personal trauma and escalating paranoia, transforming a genuinely capable young ruler who initially implemented meaningful, effective reforms into a figure whose later reign of terror against his own nobility and, in the case of Novgorod, his own civilian population, along with the singular tragic act of killing his own son and heir, directly contributed to decades of subsequent instability that nearly destroyed the very state he had spent his reign attempting to strengthen and expand. If stories like this, where a ruler's personal psychological unraveling directly reshaped the fate of an entire empire, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.